Hey everyone, today I am back in Lost Ark to talk about our new class Breaker. Took a little bit longer than I would have wanted to get this video out there, but because it's taken so long, I've also had a lot more time to put into the class to kind of get a better feeling of it and kind of see where its strengths and weaknesses lie and just form a better opinion on the class rather than just a kind of a first impression that it left behind during the first and second week. So when it comes down to my Breaker, it is pretty much at the point where I can leave it alone now. It's 1610, it's level 60. Got all the level 5 tripods, I finished this 5x3+1 build. The only thing I'm missing is like a level 9 damage gem, which I still want to give him. But outside of that, he basically has everything. He even has his 35 set elixirs done, which is basically everything you need if you want to go into Theamine normal mode, which I do plan to do. Maybe not next week, but I'm gonna see where I can kind of fit him in there once I am done progging it on my main class. Now, when it comes down to Breaker, you have two very different playstyles. You have the Asura Breaker, which is a front attacker, feels a little bit more like a sustained DPS class, even though your identity skill, which takes about 6 seconds to complete, is going to be doing about 50% of your damage output. So while most of your damage is coming from your identity, basically half of it is still coming from your normal skills as well, and some of your normal skills also hit really hard, so you can definitely see some really nice numbers over there as well. On the other hand, we have the King's Fist build. I believe it's called Brawl King Storm or something in our build. I'm just going to refer to it as King's Fist. This is a spec build, much slower. Your damage is basically going to be condensed in two big skills that you can get out in about 2 to 3 seconds. And this is also a Hitmaster build, so if you don't really like the front attack playstyle, then maybe King's Fist is something for you. Now, when it came down to my first impressions, I didn't really think I was going to like King's Fist at all because it's slow, it's sluggish, it's a spec class, it's a melee spec class on top of that, and with me having played Deathblow Striker before, wasn't really that interested in it, but after having tried it out, I can actually say that King's Fist is a whole lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. You're not really spending a whole lot of time building up your identity gauge because about one rotation is all that it takes to fill up the gauge, and then while your identity gauge is active, yes, the majority of your damage comes from your two big burst skills. You still have a lot of time left inside of your identity state after you use those two big bursty skills, because you're going to be using your stamina skills and then you can mix in auto attacks to give yourself cooldown reduction on all of your skills. And you still have a third DPS skill as well that you can use. However, that one isn't as important to land as it is landing your two big hits, because like about, let's say, 70%, maybe even 80% of your damage is going to come from those two big skills, and then you have your third big skill, which still does like a little bit of extra towards the end of your identity state, I guess you could say. But it does feel a whole lot better. I thought it was really going to be build up gauge, do your two big nukes, and then just kind of do nothing until you can build your gauge again. But as long as your identity state is active, it feels very active to play. You're going to be using that stamina skill, mix in an auto attack, skill auto, you use your other spender, skill auto again, until your gauge is done, and then you just quickly build up your identity again by using your normal skills, and then you just ride back to bursting. Feels a lot better than I thought it was going to feel. Still a bit slow, because of course you are still a zero swiftness spec class, which can feel a little bit bad sometimes, but overall I feel like it feels pretty good to play. Still not as fun as Asura Breaker though, which is the one that I decided to pick. That one feels really fun to play. I have always enjoyed front attack playstyle because it's just that little bit more riskier to play, so it's a little bit more fun and engaging, I guess, than just playing a back attacker. But for me, the classes that were available just felt a little bit too sluggish. Gunlancer, you have that big shield, you also have the weird spacebar that I wasn't really a huge fan of, and Destroyer, while very fun, and I've played it quite extensively, it is a very slow class. Even after the balance patch that we got a couple of months ago, it's still a fairly slow class if you end up playing that, and while it is fun, it was a little bit too slow to my liking. I'm somebody that primarily plays swiftness classes. I like active classes, lots of button presses, lots of movement speed, lots of attack speed, and Destroyer wasn't really that. So when I looked towards Breaker, and it was essentially going to be a taijutsu scrapper but a front attacker, I was kind of interested in that, and it actually ended up being kind of just that. You do have the alternation between your two primarily skill types, your stamina skills and your shock skills, because that's how you're going to be building up your identity gauge. But outside of that, it basically plays like a Taijutsu Scrapper with a little bit of built-in defensive stuff that you can use to just stand toe-to-toe in the face of a boss fight. Now, of course, there are certain encounters, like for example the Akan raid, where front attacking isn't always as safe, so you need to be a little bit more careful on certain patterns and certain attacks so that you don't really screw yourself over or your party, because in Akan Gate 1, for example, you could really make life of your party hell if you just stand in front of the boss and just tank through a lot of stuff. But if you're mindful of that, it's definitely fine to front attack on that one. I've done a couple of accounts now on the class, and I've been able to MVP quite a few of them at this point. Might also have a little bit to do with the fact that Breaker is, well, kind of broken and does a lot of damage, but still it just feels quite okay to play, even on those fights where it's a little bit more difficult to front attack. You just have to be a little bit more mindful. Maybe hit the skills that don't do as much damage on the back or on the side, and then when you have your big hits coming up, make sure you land those on the face of the boss, and you're going to be doing more than fine when it comes down to your DPS output, even if they were to kind of nerf the class in the future, which I could totally see happening, because Breaker does feel a little bit broken at the moment, kind of like Soul Eater at this point. But Soul Eater's been untouched for a long time as well, so I'm not really quite sure if it's ever going to happen. If anything, hopefully they just buff the other classes up to the same level of power. When it comes down to my personal enjoyment, I didn't really think I was going to like the Asura identity skill all that much, the offensive part of it, but it actually doesn't really take that much time to do, and it's actually not that bad either. If you spam your auto attacks, you get to finish the attack faster. We're even allowed to keep your adrenaline stacks if you do it fast enough. So the skill doesn't really take too much time, and it's also only there once every 30 to 40 seconds. So it definitely isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It's also kind of funny, and it's just kind of nice to just see the numbers coming as well, because you do hit for like 10 million or something per punch, and the speed at which you see those punches go is just kind of ridiculous. So it is kind of fun. I kind of come to like it, I guess you could say. And the rest of the class, when it comes down to Asura, which I thought was going to be really fun, is just a whole lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. Playing around the defensive side of your identity gauge is also really fun. And yeah, I just think it's a lot of good fun in general when it comes down to the class. Outside of just the damage and the fun aspect, it's also just a good class to take to a raid as well, because it has good weak point, good stagger, and when it comes down to Asura, you've got 2 counters in your basic build, so it's just all around great to have on the team as well. And for me, when I play classes like that, it also just feels really good that you're able to contribute to the stagger checks, to the weak point checks, because that is something that I was also kind of thinking of when I considered if I was going to push a Breaker or a Machinist, because when I look at my Machinist, yes, it does pretty good stagger, but it only has 1 weak point skill, at least the build that I wanted to play. So it feels kind of bad that you're kind of dead weight when it comes down to something like that. If I were to look at, for example, Akan Gate 2 at the end, feels incredibly bad because the 1 weak point skill you have is also your counter skill. So it's either, do I want to do 1 weak point on the boss, or do I want to counter the ghosts that are coming in? There's not really any good choice over there. Whereas with Breaker, you got 4 weak point skills and you have 2 counters, of which do not have weak point on them, so you can use them to counter the ghosts. Feels so much more satisfying to do that. Same thing goes for Scrapper, by the way. Like, Scrapper just shits on that weak point check, and then you can counter it and go back to doing weak point again as well. So that's like another thing that I kind of thought about when I went for pushing the Breaker instead of pushing my Machinist. But overall, been enjoying the class a lot. In the first week or so, there was a bit of a learning curve to kind of get used to front attacking again, also just get used to the class itself. But now I feel like I'm kind of at a point where I'm pretty okay at the class. Still, of course, a lot of room for improvement, because I haven't really played the front attacker for a while. I have played Destroyer a bunch, but it's been a while since I played that one. And now it's just kind of fun getting back into that. Also figuring out the optimal times of where to use that shield from your identity skill, to just kind of be able to face tank through things a little bit more. On some fights it's very obvious where you want to use it, on others maybe not as much. You could also spec your biggest DPS skill to become another defensive option as well, where you give it push immunity and kind of like a retaliation attack on it, which is really cool. But I personally have not played around with that yet. Maybe when I go into Theamine and I want a little bit more defensive stuff in my kit, I might play around with that. But for now I haven't really felt the need for that just yet. But it's really nice that the option is there. So for now, I'm going to be enjoying my Breaker. I think it's a really fun class, and again, just like with Soul Eater, it does everything. Good weak point, good stagger, amazing damage, it's fairly tanky. What's not to like? but I do kind of feel like it does a little bit too much damage, and just like with Soul Eater, I do hope that they bring it down a little bit, because it would do the balance of the game good, and I would prefer to play a game where the balance is a little bit better. But of course, they want to make money, and making new classes very strong so that whales will whale on it to main swap to it is one of the strategies that you can employ in games like this to make more money, but maybe that is a topic for another time. Anyways, I think I've talked about Breaker enough. Let me know in the comments down below what you ended up pushing with your power pass. Did you make Breaker? If so, which of the two builds do you play, and do you enjoy playing it? If not, let me know what other class you pushed, and if you are enjoying that one, yes or no. But for now, that's gonna do it for me, so I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.